we were summoned into this sort of mud hut, which was the police station, by this young guy who was in charge. And basically, he was telling he was gonna have us killed, and we were surrounded by teenagers with like AK-47s. No one can believe he's still alive. And I said to him, well, what would have happened if they'd have killed us? What would have been the ramifications? And he was like, it's a war zone. There's no ramifications. They're in charge. Everybody wants love and respect. Everybody fears the opposite of those things, which is, rejection and humiliation. And the most persuasive stories are the ones that make this deal with us, that say, if you act in a certain way, you're going to get what you want, which is connection and status. That's how dumb we are. That's how crazy we are, us humans, about connection and status. We desire love and respect so much that we'll even sign up to a ridiculous habit like smoking. And so when we identify with a brand or a pop star or a political organization, something quite sort of weird happens is that we make that thing part of ourselves. We make it part of our identity. So when it's attacked, we feel that we've been attacked, like we personally have been attacked.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Will Storr, thank you so much for joining us today. You are both an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. Your work challenges the way we think about identity, belief, and the very nature of truth. Will, before we get into your background, you have to tell us your story about nearly being executed by a South Sudan militia.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, that must have been about 15 years ago now. So before I was an author, I was a journalist, and I was reporting in South Sudan on the civil war, and we wanted to go to this area where the paramilitaries were in charge, this paramilitary group. So you got these two warring sides, and there was kind of this third group that were in their own little bubble. We got clearance by the UN to go there. They said it's fine, you can go there, it's safe. But it totally wasn't safe. As soon as we were in this boat, we got into the area. We were summoned into this sort of mud hut, which was the police station, by this young guy who was in charge. And it was like something out of Tarantino. He was this young guy in white silk pajamas he was wearing, just furious, and basically was telling he was gonna have us killed. And we were surrounded by teenagers with like AK-47s, and we were there for about 12 hours. And we only just got out there by luck because this young guy, his boss, turned up, and his boss, for some political reason, owed the UN a favor, or didn't want to, there was some reason why he had to keep the UN suite because something had happened a few days before. And so that's why he let us go. There's some horse trading thing. And so it was kind of terrifying. And then the next day was we were getting the flight out, the UN guy was there who gave us permission, and he was like, he said to us, you've got no idea, everyone's talking about you. And I was like, why? He said, because no one can believe you're still alive. And I said to him, well, what would have happened if they'd have killed us? What would have been the ramifications? And he was like, it's a war zone. There's no ramifications. They're in charge. Like, there would have been no ramifications. And he said, yeah, you've got no idea how lucky you are to have survived that. So yeah, it was pretty terrifying. When I got back, it took me probably a couple of weeks before I told my wife what had happened.
Did you know in the moment, like when they brought you into the hut there, did you know how bad it was, or did you not realize it until after?
When they surrounded the hut with kids with AK-47s, it was pretty clear. And he was saying things like, you will not get out of here. So it was pretty clear. One of the guys that we were with was a fixer, and he used to be in the army. So I basically just copied him. And we did do some training before we went to South Sudan, to what would happen if you're abducted. And it was things about like, never plead, never beg, always remain calm and as if you're kind of in control, which I thought was quite interesting. Like there's a status thing where I think as soon as you start begging and pleading, it's kind of over for you. They kind of view you with contempt. So I just copied him. Whatever his eyes were doing, I was going to do,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty scary.
Scary is a bit of an understatement. Your work spans from ghost hunting to ghost writing. How did your early years as a photographer and journalist shaped the storyteller you are today?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before. So I think, well, I mean, one of the things it teaches you is to try and use kind of simple language. I think that's really important thing that journalism teaches you, that you're trying to, your main job is to communicate. But also, really, I think the main way it shaped me being a journalist is that you really, if you're doing your job properly, it really teaches you that there are always at least two sides to every story. So when I was a young man, I'd go into a situation completely convinced that I knew everything, that I got it. I knew who the good guys were, I knew who the bad guys were. But then you'd go in and you'd talk to people and you'd enter situations, and then you'd realize that actually the other side had a really good point, and you might not end up agreeing with them, but you began to see the world a bit more through their eyes. So I think the main thing that journalism taught me was that the world is way more complex than it seems when you're just reading the paper or scrolling through, Twitter or Reddit, whatever it is. There's always, people are very rarely evil, in that sense that we think people are. They're usually acting with the best intention. It's just that they've got a different understanding of how the world works than you do. That's the main thing that journalism taught me. It
seems like now they almost intentionally only report one side to kind of fan the flame of making people angry in journalism. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of both sides anymore.
That's right, and that's because of the internet. Like when I started as a journalist in the early 2000s, it was just at the end of that kind of journalism where it was about truth and balance was really genuinely important, and because in order to make money they had to get clicks, because the more clicks the higher they could charge for the advertising rate, and the more you got clicks was moral outrage. So that had a massively sort of disastrous impact on journalism as far as I could see. I mean, I used to write for The Guardian, a big left-wing newspaper, and The Guardian used to pride itself on balance. And they had this brilliant TV advert in the 90s where it showed this like white skinhead, racist-looking guy with a shaved head running down the street, and he pushes this woman and throws her. And then you see it from another angle, and you see that there's some bricks falling down from a crane, and he's saved her life. And the point being, don't judge this guy because he's a white skinhead. He was actually doing something really good. Like The Guardian today would never run that advert because they're so one-sided. They would be kind of allergic to writing a story about a white skinhead, being a good guy. So and that's true on both sides. So I think the internet has had a largely negative effect on this kind of ambition that journalists used to have to tell the truth. Even if it was uncomfortable to tell the truth. I think it exists less now.
Do you think it's the internet or social media has a bigger impact? I guess, or maybe they're too linked to even tell the difference.
I think they're linked, but a lot of it is the advertising model. Newspapers used to make money for advertising, principally, and classified advertising, and all of that got swallowed up by Google and Facebook. They took all that revenue away. So the only way they could survive, and most of these newspapers, especially in the UK, they're only just surviving still, is by click, 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 click. So they become algorithmic. They become about moral outrage, about annoying, irritating people, and saying, here's a villain that you can hate, and I'm going to make you click on this thing, and we can all hate this villain together. So yeah, I think a lot of it, social media obviously doesn't help. But my experience of it was a lot about the advertising. It was how the newspapers had to be in order to make money.
You've explored some dark and often taboo subjects like supernatural beliefs, human right abuses, suicide. What compels you to go where most people look away?
Well, I suppose it's just that's the most interesting stuff for me. The kind of dark side of. The dark side of life. I mean, when I was a journalist, I was mostly freelance. So, the advantage of that is that you can write what you want to write. So yeah, I would often be, I'm very interested in, irrational, supernatural, belief, why people believe the things that they believe. And subjects like, suicide and sexual violence. I don't know. I find it all kind of really fascinating. And a lot of it's because of, the people that you meet, the people that you meet who have survived human rights abuses or survived, attempts at suicide, they're often extremely fascinating. I think the people who have had the most extreme experiences can often teach you the most about, life. So that they're the most interesting people.
I've never thought about it that way. I think you're probably right. Hey, you recently wrote about the death of your father. In what ways did that loss affect the stories you tell and the way you understand narrative and memory?
Wow, you did some excellent research. I wrote an essay about the loss of my father recently. My dad died in October, and I didn't have a great relationship with my dad. He was kind of really kind of what in England we'd think of as a Victorian parent. So he was very into punishment and shouting, not much into love or affection. So really that affected me a lot. That affected me a lot as a child, and it continues to affect me. And what I wrote about in the essay was the experience really of, when I was getting older, when I was a young adult, I tried to make friends with my dad and build a relationship with him. But for some reason, that relationship was never available. Like he was never particularly interested. And so I always wondered what would happen when he died, whether I'd sort of have this sense of regret that I didn't try harder or anything like that. But as it turned out, I didn't really. Like it's sad, really. Like I didn't really mourn him, because he played no role in my life. There was no gap in my brain that he would fill. He didn't used to phone me or anything like that. So yeah, it was kind of sad. In a way, it showed you how dead the relationship was. That when he died, I was very shocked, and I cried on the day he died. But after that, it probably took me about 2 weeks to stop thinking about it, which is sad.
Were you close with your mom, or were you not close with really either of your parents?
No. No. I mean, they're both the same, really. My mum is still with us. She's got Parkinson's, unfortunately, so she's very unwell. But she was pretty Victorian. Dad was quite aggressive. Mum was cold. So yeah, it's not. It wasn't much fun growing up.
It's a nice way to put it.
You've kept your personal life relatively private, but you and Farah both work in storytelling. How has that shared language shaped your relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I have written, quite a lot of personal stuff in some of the books that I've written. In The Heretics, which was called The Unpersuadables. In the US, I did write a bit about what it was like growing up in a very religious household. So my parents were very Catholic, and very strict, and so I think that's one of the reasons that I became interested in why people believe supernatural things, unlikely things, because I wanted to understand my parents' very sincere belief in God and the literal existence of God and the literal existence of the devil. Which I always found very confusing as a child. So that's the kind of personal stuff that I've written in my stories.
You've described storytelling not just as art, but as survival, something baked into our biology. Why do we need stories so badly?
Well, humans are the storytelling animal. We think in stories. We understand who we are in the form of narrative. We think about our lives in the form of story. So they are completely essential to our to our lives. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, we kind of developed this ability to experience the world in this kind of narrative form, and what that did was it enabled us to all work together as highly cooperative groups. So what storytelling does is it gets lots of individual brains and wires them together so they're all seeing the world in the same way, and they have the same understanding of what's good and what's bad, and who is a hero and who is a villain. So if you think about a group like the Democrats and a group like the Republicans, they're all bound together by their particular stories about the world. Are tariffs good or are tariffs bad? Is the US AID good or is it bad? Who is a hero? Who is a villain? Is Obama good or is he bad? So they both have very different stories of the world, and those stories, fuse all their individual brains together and get them thinking as one. So, humans are this kind of weird combination of ape and ant. We're very ant-like. We tend to solve the problems of existence by forming these groups, whether it's a political group or a corporation or a religion or a cult, and it's story that enables us to do that. So it's story. So it's fundamental to human civilization. It's fundamental to human progress in society. And on the individual level, what happens is that we're born into this story world, which is like a culture, and the culture tells us. Our parents read us stories when we're growing up about heroes and villains and good and bad. And we might be religious. We might have a Bible or a Quran that feeds those ideas as well. Stories that feeds those ideas, and so all that tells us what is a good person and what is a bad person, what is a successful person and what is a failed person, and it's those ideas around which we organize our lives. So they're absolutely kind of crucial. A human without a story would be an animal. It would be a non-human thing.
It's interesting, like tying that back to what you're saying about journalism, of when you have a story or writing a story, kind of putting both sides out, and when you're kind of believing the stories of, using politics as an example because it's so tribal, it's like understanding your side of the story, but actually trying to look at the other side too. I wonder what that would do to the.
That's the danger of stories. People don't really want to hear the other side of the story. They want to hear their own story, and they want to be reaffirmed and reassured that their perception of the world, their story, is the correct one. So that's why, as the quality of journalism has gone down, the one-sidedness has gone up, because they're just giving people what they want, and what people tend to want is, I'm right, we're right, they're wrong. So yeah, and I sympathise with that too. Like it's when you are confronted with the stories of people that you don't agree with, it's emotional. You feel attacked, you feel threatened, you feel undermined, you feel enraged. So it's uncomfortable. But I do feel like in America, in the UK, in Canada, certainly in the English-speaking worlds, we've kind of gone backwards on that over the last 20 years. We've become more isolated in our particular stories and less able to hear the stories of people who aren't like us.
What do you think we can do about that?
I really think it's about on an individual level. So understanding the psychology of it all, understanding that we have these storytelling brains that they don't particularly interested in truth. The human brain, it's interested in the story. It wants us to believe in stories because the story is what enables us to cooperate and collaborate in the groups that keep us alive. So the brain is not assigned. Evolution didn't make us scientists; it made us kind of storytellers. So it's understanding that we are often tricked by our own brains into being biased and prejudiced against people who aren't like us, and to try and keep that close, that kind of core understanding that we're always going to be being told a story that the people across the aisle are evil, but it's very rarely true. I mean, of course, you get some instance like the Holocaust was an evil act. On the extremes, you're going to have acts of evil. But generally speaking, it's just people have a different idea. Like with the Trump stuff, I'm by no means a Trump supporter, but he's doing his tariffs thing, and it's a nightmare because my pension's gone down. It's a disaster for my pension. But people paint that as tell a story about Trump's evil. He's and there's all these conspiracy theories about how he's gaming the markets to make billions and this, that, and the other. He just has this idea about tariffs, which is that if you raise tariffs, it means that you're going to bring manufacturing back to America. It means that you're going to be protected from some of the ill effects of globalization. Like, it's an idea about the economy. It's an idea about how to make America better. It's an idea. It's not evil. It's not, it's not coming from a place of satanic evil. He's just got a different idea about how things might work out. Maybe he's right. It doesn't look like he's right at the moment. It looks like it's very bad for the economy. But like maybe over the long term, like it's true that since the rise of globalization, manufacturing has left US, UK for the Asian countries, and they've done very well out of that. So he wants to bring some of that back. So. Like, I don't think it's going to work personally, but I'm not an economist. I don't know. And, 99.9% of the people who are going on about this, they're not economists either. They don't know either. But that's what I mean. He's just got a different idea about how this shit should work. And he's trying it out. That's what's going on. But the temptation is always to tell a story of moral evil. And 9 times out of 10, that's not correct. And actually, it does everybody harm to keep telling those stories.
I worry about kind of like another story. I didn't even mean to do this, but I worry about kind of like the story of the boy who cried wolf. Because I've been told, like, in my lifetime, I've had three once in a lifetime recessions. In my lifetime, I've been told, and I'm 31. In my lifetime, every single thing in the media is, this politician is the devil, this one's an angel. And then you see the exact opposite of the article written by a different publication. So now, like, what I'm worried about is when there actually is somebody that's like truly just awful, they're going to kind of skate by because everyone's so tribal now. It's like, I'll just believe whatever I'm told by this side rather than looking at it objectively.
That's right. And you lose faith. You lose faith in the people that are supposed to be informing you because they're just telling you stories, and you stop believing them. I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and it's definitely a danger.
Only time will tell what that leads to. Will, in The Science of Storytelling, you write that we're all the heroes of our own stories. What happens when reality challenges that narrative? When we feel like the villain, or worse, like we don't matter in the story at all?
Well, there's two different answers to that. Like, when we're made to feel like we're not the heroes of our stories, I mean, people often just go to denial. They'll very often instantly generate a story in which they actually the good guys after all. And that's what you'll find. We have these storytelling brains, and if something challenges us, if somebody attacks us or insults us, or if we get into trouble at work, our brain will immediately start generating this narrative. No, it's not fair, because actually, and it'll be but I'm the good guy story. And if you're anything like me, that'll often happen on Friday, and all weekend you'll be having this story running around your head, and you can't get rid of it. It's really annoying. It's like almost debilitating, obsessively thinking about this thing you've got. And, that's because we're a tribal animal. We evolved in a hunter-gatherer tribe. And it was very important that we were able to defend ourselves in that tribe and generate a story that would defend our claim to being a successful tribal member. So, there were savage days. People would be killed in hunter-gatherer tribes, typically, for really breaking the rules too much. So we have this kind of fear of being in trouble, sort of deeply ingrained in us, that makes us act in denial of the times when we're not particularly heroic. So that's the kind of the first answer. But then you also asked about what happens when we sort of completely sort of fail to be the heroes of our lives again and again and again. And unfortunately, humans are uniquely storytellers, and part of that is the curse of humans being uniquely suicidal. What happens when we feel like we can never be heroic, that we feel that we have no connection to other people, that we're lonely, we're disliked. We also have no status. We have nobody values us. We have nothing to contribute to society. Very often you hear people talking about being a burden. And what that leads to is people become suicidal. They don't want to, they feel that their story is at an end, and that they can't rescue themselves. And that's when you get this very tragic situation when people decide that they can't deal with the pain of that. And so they decide instead to take their own lives.
So do you think it's the pain do you think it's the pain or the hopelessness I guess I know it's some kind of combination, but which one do you think is more critical?
I think it's the pain that is the result of the hopelessness. So when you look at the scientific research, one of the things that really predicts suicidality is the feeling of being stuck. So everybody goes through life crises, but when you feel like you're stuck in your life crisis and there's no hope of getting out of it, and this is generally to do with connection and status. So when people feel unloved, feel very socially isolated, and as I say, they feel like they're offering no value to the world. And when they feel that there's no hope of them ever finding connection, a loving connection with people, and no hope of finding anything to do with their lives, like make a podcast, for example, then that's when people tend to get in trouble.
You've written that identity is a kind of fiction that we tell ourselves. How do stories reshape identity for better or worse?
Well, identity is kind of like, the way I see identity is it's the character that we play in the story world of our lives. So, we're these storytelling animals that live in the context of stories. Our lives, we're going on missions, trying to achieve certain things, becoming a sports star, becoming a great podcaster. So we have these kind of missions. And so that's the story world. Those are the plots of our lives, and identity is the kind of character that we're playing in the story of our lives. So we kind of so that's what identity is. It's this kind of semi-fictional kind of construct, and that's why people who gather together in certain groups tend to be quite alike. It's why you see, in our adolescence is when we're building our identity, we're making our identity really when we're teenagers, and people sort of gather into these peer groups, and they start very obviously copying the high status people in their group, start copying pop stars or sports stars that they identify with, because they're kind of building their identity. They're looking at who are heroes in my life and taking pieces and parts of them, whether it's how they dress or their body language or their language or their actual language, the way they talk, or their tastes in art and music. So we have that kind of rapid identity creation period in adolescence, and then that doesn't really stop as we go through our lives. Of course, it calms down a lot, but we're always trying to build this particular identity.
Your latest book, A Story is a Deal, reframes storytelling as a kind of contract. What is that deal we're making with the audience, and what happens when we break it?
Well, when I say a story is a deal, it's that idea that it's really a deal that you're making with identity, and it's really talking about how persuasive stories that persuade people, are kind of offering our identity something subconscious. So, an identity, a human identity, wants two things. It wants the same thing as a hero does in a story. So, in a story like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, he begins kind of a low status. He's this kind of isolated farm boy working on a moisture farm with his uncle and his aunt. And then by the end of the first movie, he's his hero. He's got a gold medal. Everyone, like 1 million people are applauding him. He's got these new friends. So he's earned connection and status, which are the two things that kind of all humans want. We want to be loved and respected. Those are two separate things. And so when stories are persuasive, that's what they're doing. They're showing everybody wants love and respect. Everybody fears the opposite of those things, which is, rejection and humiliation. These are kind of fundamental human yearnings, fundamental human fears. And the most persuasive stories are the ones that make this deal with us, that say, if you act in a certain way, you're going to get what you want, which is connection and status. So you can think about that in children's stories, which they're constantly teaching you the same things. Whereas if you're brave and courageous and kind and, whatever, if you act like the hero in this story, if you do the things the hero in this story does, your reward is going to be connection and status. So at the very end of the story, what we typically see in archetypal storytelling is the hero gets these rewards. They're more loved and more admired, and that's also true in Star Wars and any number of in Squid Game and Hunger Games and any number of popular stories. They're making this unconscious deal with our identity. They're saying, if you do this, you're going to get these social rewards.
You argue that the traditional business story misses the mark by focusing on the surface. What are most companies getting wrong about how humans actually process a story?
Well, I think often businesses want to sell their products, understandably, by telling you what's good about their products. I mean, what could be more obvious than that? This car goes this fast. It's got these amazing tires. I don't know, whatever that list of things might be that tells you the car is amazing. But what is much more powerful is selling identities, or making that deal with identity. So the classic kind of obvious example that everyone talks about, because they're the best at it, or they were, is Apple computers. Apple, one of Apple's most famous campaigns was that Think Different campaign, where they showed you pictures of Gandhi and John Lennon and Mother Teresa, all these rule breakers and these crazy creatives who changed the world, and with a strapline Think Different. Massively successful, completely kind of rewired how people not only saw Apple, but how people saw the whole tech sector as being this place of creative, rule-breaking, world-changing people. Change the world became a cliche in the tech world for 15, 20 years after that. And what's interesting about that campaign, apart from the fact it was massively influential and successful, is also the fact that it tells you nothing whatsoever about Apple products. I mean, there was not even a picture of a computer or anything. There was no specs, no price, nothing. It was just a picture of a bunch of people that you know from history books, and then Think Different, an Apple logo. So that's the stuff that's really massively successful, in advertising. And to kind of understand how powerful appeals to identity, offers of connection and offers of status are. In the stories I do, I tell the story about smoking, about how crazy it is that we smoked. Like when I was growing up teenager in the 90s, late 90s, I knew perfectly well that if I started up smoking, I was signing up to addiction. I was signing up to having a lot less money. I was signing up to possibly death and yellow fingers and yellow teeth. All of that. It's a terrible bloody deal. It's awful. But why do you smoke? Because it makes you look about 8% cooler sometimes. It gives you a little bit of status. And so I smoked. Everybody I knew smoked. These were the grunge years. Everybody smoked. So that's how dumb we are. That's how crazy we are, us humans, about connection and status. We desire love and respect so much that we'll even sign up to a ridiculous habit like smoking. These are the appeals that really work, and that's why it's always been a mistake for governments to try and counteract smoking by putting pictures of diseased lungs and hearts on cigarette packets and saying smoking is going to kill you, because we know that already. We know smoking is going to kill us. We don't care. How you stop smoking is by making it low status, and that's exactly what they did accidentally. Starting in California, when they started worrying about secondhand smoke. So why should somebody smoking in a restaurant puff their smoke into my face? So they made smoking illegal in restaurants and in workplaces. And that spread around America. It spread into Europe and in the UK. And suddenly you couldn't be cool smoking anymore, because instead of sitting at the bar smoking, you had to go out and smoke by the bins. It started to be seen as a bit of a nasty little, I've got to go have a cigarette, and they'd come back stinking of smoke. And very quickly, smoking fell out of fashion because it just wasn't cool anymore. So that they kind of accidentally ended smoking by reducing its ability to offer status to people. Of course, it's coming back now in the form of vaping, which is a whole new problem. But you can't understand the craziness of smoking without understanding how desperate we are for status, even a little bit of it.
You write that stories offer a kind of social upgrade, that if we believe and internalize the message, we might rise in status and belong more deeply. How do you see that idea playing out in modern culture, politics, brands, even cults?
Well, I mean, it plays out constantly. And so in the book, The Status Game, I write about this idea called active belief. So active belief. So when you look at how groups work, if you want to join the group of the Christians, you have to believe something, which is you have to believe in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the main thing. And if you believe in the reality of Jesus and that he died and was resurrected after 3 days, you're of course you'll be baptized. You're a Christian. That's fine. So you've then got connection into the Christian family, in the Christian group. But in order to earn status in that group, you have to let those Christian beliefs take over your mind, and you have to act them out. So you have to act out the 10 Commandments. Perhaps like my parents, you would only eat fish on Fridays, and you give out something for Lent, and you'd have to become a Christian. And so that's how you earn status in human groups is that you use active belief. It's not just passive belief. It's like, I'm going to become, I'm going to become this person. In the status game, I spoke to somebody who was an anti-vaxxer who, talked about how, she joined a Facebook group called Great Mums Protesting Vaccines, I think it was called. But she only started earning status in that group when she declined to vaccinate her child, and she would come, she would get in arguments with people about vaccines and arguing it was all a big pharma conspiracy. She would come back and report back on this stuff, and she would get status in the group. People go, oh, amazing, you go, girl, that's fantastic. And so that's not just her, that's everybody. That's what we do. That's how we earn status in our groups, by acting out the beliefs of the group. And you mentioned cults. I think cults are the most extreme form of the human group. They're the tightest, most rigid form of human groups. And they're the most extreme groups in every way. And, certainly in cults, you have to completely, that's why people say people who are brainwashed in their cults, because they are completely kind of subsumed and possessed by the story of the cult. And they have to act out the story of the cult in to a minute degree. And if they don't do that, they get punished. So in the most extreme form, we all do this. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I do it. I'm in the status game of writers. So I've got books behind me. That's what we do as writers. Like we all do it. But like in a cult, that's the most extreme form. That where you really are, as they say, brainwashed. You're fully acting out the story of the group with no room for anything else.
And then how are people in those scenarios, like, how do you go from believing the story so much that you're acting on it to try to gain status within that group of people who believe the story to changing stories? When you're young, you see it so often where kids, like you said, change socially kind of overnight, depending on what the latest fad is. But for adults, how do you get that? How do you break through the story?
Well, I think one of the things that humans can do and do is that they're members of multiple groups, and so that's why cults are so dangerous, because a cult tends to insist that you are only a member of their group, even to the exclusion of your family, and that's why they typically say you can't speak to your family anymore, because they only want your only group is the cult. Whereas for most of the rest of us, we have multiple identities in multiple groups. So. I interviewed somebody for a few years ago that always very impressed me a lot, called Mark Linus. And so Mark Linus was a very radical kind of eco-terrorist. He was big in the, do you remember, you might not remember Troy, but Tim will remember Monsanto was a big moral panic maybe 15 years ago. They were making GM crops, and he was one of these guys that was out slashing and burning Monsanto crops and all this kind of stuff. And he wrote a book on climate change, was very successful. Then he decided he was going to write a book on GM crops, and he started doing. But he also identified as somebody that loved science and was a science-led thinker, and so he researched the science of GM food. And he said to me, I learned that over 1 billion GM meals have been served, and no one's ever got sick from them. I also learned that organisations like Greenpeace are standing in the way of a particular form of GM. Genetically modified rice that has additional vitamins in it that would save the lives of, I can't remember how much it was, but hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of children. And so he changed his mind, and which was a heroic thing for him to do, in my estimation, because he lost all of his friends. They all turned on him. He became this kind of villain in the world of the eco-terrorist. But he was unable to do that because he identified also very strongly as somebody that was science-led and research-led. So I think that's often how it works, is that there's sometimes a tension between the different groups that we belong to. You might have a woman who's a very strong feminist who doesn't like men very much, but then she gives birth to a boy, and she identifies as a mother who loves her son, and that might change the way she sees men and masculinity. So we have this kind of flexible thinking that comes from the fact that we're able to have multiple identities. And when those multiple identities come into tension, it means that we can sometimes change our minds, even if we have sometimes very, very rigid beliefs. It's not that often, it's not that common. People tend to not change their minds about things that are really important to them, especially things that are important to their identity very much, but it does happen.
Could you walk us through a real-world example, a campaign, a political movement, or viral post that succeeded because it nailed this implicit deal?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm sort of always saying is that one of the things that's so important about persuasive storytelling and effective storytelling is that simplicity. And in a story as a dealer, one of the stories I tell is about NASA, and before the 1960s, NASA had a whole bunch of different missions and mission statements and things it was trying to achieve, and then along comes JFK and says, "This is what you're going to achieve," and the goal is very famously to put a man on the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade. So a very simple mission, one mission, and important. It was a mission that you could imagine, you could picture it like a movie. And when people have done research in psychology and research into the culture of NASA, that was transformative. Everybody from the scientists and the physicists, to the secretaries and the people cleaning the bathrooms, felt they were all part of this amazing mission to put a man on the moon and return safe by the end of the decade. And so you find this time and time again that simplicity, but also the concrete kind of visual nature of it it can be really motivating. Another example was Bill Gates said his mission for Microsoft was to have a future in which there was a PC on the desk of every office in America, or the world it might have been. Again, similar thing, very simple idea, easy to kind of image, easy to imagine and visualize. Very motivating. So I think that clarity and also that kind of sense of that concrete visual detail is really important for people using storytelling to persuade.
Why do you think people cling so fiercely to certain brands, ideologies, or conspiracies? Is it because they've bought into a story that affirms who they are?
Yeah, so I think people cling on so vociferously to brands and stories and groups. It goes back to that idea of what is a human identity, and a human identity, as I said, it's partly a construction. It's made up of other stuff, so when we identify with a brand or a pop star or a political organization, something quite sort of weird happens. Is that we make that thing part of ourselves. We make it part of our identity. So when it's attacked, we feel that we've been attacked, like we personally have been attacked. So, we're partly made out of beliefs. We're partly made out of brands. There's a billion people on the internet defending Apple, defending Google, defending, Microsoft, in these Reddit forums going back and forth. They're really defending themselves. There's the phenomenon of the Swifties, the people who, mostly young women who kind of savagely defend their mother, Taylor Swift, because they've made Taylor Swift part of their own identity. So when they feel that Taylor Swift is attacked, they feel attacked, and when someone says I don't like Taylor Swift, they feel like they're saying I don't like you. So again, we're all a bit like that, which is why so you've got to think about what beliefs form part of your identity, what tastes, musical tastes in literature form part of your identity. What people, stand-up comics or artists or whoever it might be, form part of your identity. Your parents will form part of your identity. And so when those things are attacked, you can tell it's forming part of your identity because you feel really emotional. You feel as if it's you yourself being attacked.
There's this great line Charlie Munger has about this. He's Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway.
Oh, yeah.
And he basically talks about how, especially young men, that they get these ideas told to them in their teenage or young 20s, and they just cling on to it and make it a whole part of their personality. And then when you look back on it, there's so many things that you defend with such honor that really don't matter at all. And he had this one line, I'm going to butcher it, but paraphrasing, it was like, I reserve the right to change my opinion every single time I get new information. So every time he hears a new thing, he'll change his opinion on it because and it's true, really. Like there's no reason to dig in and die on a hill. But I think another thing that he says about it is like, unless you can argue the other side of the argument better than the average person on that side, which is like a low bar, because most people who support things don't even know why they support it.
Yeah.
So it's like if you can argue it better than the average person on the opposite side, then you can have the belief. Otherwise, you shouldn't believe. Just have no opinion on the matter.
That's great. That sounds like wisdom to me. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
In a world so fragmented by tribalism and competing narratives, is there even such a thing as a shared story? Should we even want one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should have a shared story. I mean, it's, you know, we're going through kind of very weird times at the moment, especially with, you know, what's going on in the States. And, you know, I think we all felt there was a shared story about what's going on in Ukraine, but apparently there isn't there isn't anymore. You know, there's a, you know, there's been a split there. So you know, and it causes kind of, you know, it obviously causes division. So, you know, I don't think we're ever, well, certainly we're never going to have a world in which everybody inhabits the kind of same story. And in a way, why would you want that? It would be such a boring world in which everybody was the same and believed the same things. But as I say, that, you know, the danger is when we interpret the different story as automatically means somebody's evil. That's when we get into trouble, and you know, it's very, very, very ordinary behavior in human beings to see difference but interpret that as evil. You know, and I'm not even talking about things like skin color or gender or anything like that. You know, a lot of it is about values and about stories and about people believing a different story about the world that you do. You know, that's one of the main things that causes, certainly in the West, where we don't really have tribal violence, you know, anymore. That's the main thing that causes so much distress and division and hatred.
All right, I'm going to do a big topic change on you. Before I had ALS, people would ask me all the time if I used a ghostwriter. Now I have to use my eyes to type, so the process takes so much longer, but I still love it. You sold over 2 million copies of ghostwritten books, many of them bestsellers. What's it like to help someone else tell their story, and how do you keep your own ego out of it?
Yeah, I love it. Like, it's really good. I really like writing people's memoirs in particular, you know, telling their life story for them. Like, I you know, it's a really great intellectual challenge to try and get inside their brain and get down their life, because a life isn't really a story. It's a sequence of events. You've got to turn it into a story, which is a hard thing to do, but very satisfying thing to do. The ego in check is a good one. I mean, it's fine usually, like, because I'm writing my own books, I feel like that part of it is satisfied. The only times when it does annoy you a bit is when, like, for example, one of the first book I ever ghostwrote got shortlisted for the Non-Fiction Book of the Year prize in the UK. We were only beaten by Michelle Obama, so we were never going to beat Michelle Obama. But, like, they didn't even tell me that. They didn't, like, you thought maybe I would get invited to the award ceremony, but nobody even told me that it was shortlisted. I found out by mistake. So that's sometimes when you feel a bit like, oh fuck, you know, it's a bit like, yeah, you do feel a bit like that sometimes. So but yeah, so it's a bit, but yeah, so it just depends on who you're working with. So some publishing companies sort of understand how important you are as a ghostwriter, and it's status again. They want to make you feel valued, but other publishing companies, all they can see is the celebrity, and you're just this pest in the background who just happens to be doing all the work.
Do you have a favorite thing that you've ghostwritten?
Favorite thing that I've ghostwritten? I suppose the thing that the most recent book I wrote was called Humanize, and that was written for a guy called Thomas Heatherwick, who's a very big architect, and so he built the Google headquarters in Silicon Valley and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the books that I in a way I'm proudest of, because I feel like it. I would have liked to have written that book anyway. Like, I was already interested in architecture, particularly why so much modern architecture is so horrendous. Like, you know, when you look at when you come to the UK, you see the UK, you've got the old part of town, which is beautiful, and the new part of town, which is horrendous. It's like concrete, you know, tower blocks. And it's like, why have we forgotten? Like, why have we forgotten how to build nice buildings? Like, what happened? You know, so I was always interested in that, and that was the book that Thomas wanted to write too. But he's like a polemicist, because he's an architect. He hates all that stuff, so he wanted to write a book sort of very angrily. Well, I don't know how angry he wanted it to be. I wanted it to be angry. I was kind of pushing him to make it more angry. But yeah, he wanted to write a book kind of explaining that and arguing very passionately that buildings should be beautiful, and they shouldn't just all be these glass boxes or you know, everywhere. So that's the book I'm probably proudest of writing. And Thomas was just a fascinating guy. And it was a real honor to spend, I think, like 4 or 5 years with him, working on that book. So it was a real labor of love.
I was going to ask what that process is like. So you just basically shadow them for X amount of time, or?
Yeah, exactly. So Thomas was great because he took me all around the world to look at buildings. So we went to Barcelona to look at buildings, and we went to Vancouver to look at buildings, and Munich for some reason. I can't remember why I went to Munich. So and Singapore we went to. So yeah, we went to all these different kinds of places to look at buildings that he designed, but also buildings that other people had designed. So it was just an amazing experience. And as I say, he's like he's one of the most important architects working in the world at the moment. Like he built the Googleplex. He's building Changi Airport in Singapore. He's all over the world. He's doing stuff in China and Japan, and so people would love to get near him and to get this incredible access to him in a very real way, where you're sharing his life with him, traveling with him, and really having the privilege of just really getting inside his brain. It was amazing. Like you just don't get to have that experience. You couldn't buy that experience with any amount of money, So it was great. I loved it.
What an amazing experience. Well, the name of this podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid for several reasons. One of which is we wanted to have deep conversations that leave no stone unturned. The topic of religion, most people find taboo, but I love talking about it. Before I had ALS, I told myself a story that I was a Christian, but I don't think I was really living it. I'm still not there, but I am much closer to what I think it means to be a Christian. It has genuinely given me a new perspective on life that made me feel like I went from blurry vision to a crystal clear sight. So, a two-part question. First, how do you think the story of religion plays into our lives? And second, have you ever leaned into it yourself?
So this is why I have a problem with sort of the atheists like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, these scientists who are, very, very atheistic and kind of preach in their own way that religion is just this evil thing. And I used to be a bit like that when I was young and angry. But since I've learned about this stuff, I realised that religion plays a massive part in people's lives, not least my parents, and it gives people sort of enormous meaning and enormous purpose, and it gives people an identity, and those are the essential ingredients of a life well lived. That's what we need. So I've become a kind of, even though I'm atheist, I'm a supporter of religion, whereas I didn't used to be, because I see the enormous value it gives people, and there's also a more fundamental thing. They're just having the humility of saying, I don't know what the secret of the universe is. I don't know what happens after we die. Nobody knows these things. So to sort of disregard that kind of certainty about whether what is definitely true and what definitely isn't true. I remember watching a cosmologist on television saying that the truth of reality is so mysterious that the human being trying to understand it is like a dog watching television and trying to understand how the TV works. Like it's probably way beyond that, our comprehension. And that kind of gave me some hope. As for have I ever leaned into it? So one of the things that I wrote about 15 years ago, which I know that people sort of picked up on, was I went to Eastern Europe with a bunch of Holocaust deniers, as well as a historian called David Irving. And David Irving was once a very well-respected historian of the Second World War, and then became someone who was very controversial because he decided that Hitler was a friend of the Jews and didn't know anything about the Holocaust. So I went away with these people undercover, pretending I was a Holocaust denier too. And I had a very disturbing experience. One day we went to a concentration camp called Majdanek, and it's horrendous. It's one of the best preserved concentration camps in Europe. And there was a horrendous scene in a gas chamber. We were literally standing in a gas chamber with all these Russian school kids on a school tour, and Irving started shouting about how it was all basically a set, and these are not real doors, and this, that, and the other. And I found the whole situation so disturbing that I walked off and I found a quiet corner, and I crossed myself and I prayed, and I don't know where that came from. It just felt like something that I had to do in that moment. I just felt, I was also saying, you very rarely feel like evil is a real thing, but that felt a bit evil, and so it's funny when, even though I identify as an atheist, there are moments when something kind of overtakes you, and not only did I pray, it did make me feel better. There was something about the ritual of that, which kind of pulled me down a bit, and sort of lessen.
It's interesting that you're an atheist, but you felt. It sounds like you felt something spiritual doing that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was weird because I didn't. It was just completely spontaneous. Yeah. It was something that I haven't done since. But yeah, it was just something about that situation. It was just horrendous because some of these girls were so disturbed, they were in tears, they were crying, they didn't know what was going on. So yeah, it was, and just being in a concentration camp and having them because they were like making jokes, saying it was a Hollywood set and stuff. Like it was really disturbing, the whole thing. Yeah.
I don't blame you. That is disturbing. If you could teach one principle of storytelling to every leader, teacher, or parent, just one, what would it be?
That's a good question. One principle of storytelling to every teacher, leader, or parent. I suppose one of the most important ones is to develop the skill of listening to other people's stories. I think that's, because we become so preoccupied with telling our own story, me, and broadcasting our story and trying to influence other people, that we forget the crucial importance of listening to other people's stories. And I think that's good for two reasons. The first reason it's good is because it reminds us, if we're genuinely listening with compassion and patience, that other people's perspectives, that we might never agree with them, but we might be able to empathize with them. And very often, if we're listening properly, we can empathize with them. And the other thing is that it puts our own problems often into perspective. It's very easy to get lost in our own problems, our own stresses and strains and dramas and emotions, and it can be very therapeutic listening to the lived experience of somebody else, because it just takes you out of your head and it puts your own stuff into perspective. So I would say that's if there was one skill that I would teach you, it would, rather than it be telling your own story, it would be genuinely, actively listening to the stories of other people.
You've spent your life pulling apart the mechanics of how stories work. Has that made you more cynical about them or more in awe of them?
Both, definitely. I mean, I'm always in awe of the power of story, because you see you see its incredible power to convince us that we're right about everything we believe and everybody else is wrong. I'm no different from anybody else. I'm convinced all my beliefs are correct and about politics, and everybody else is wrong. And even though I know rationally that can't be true, because who's right about everything? No one's right about everything, but I am. That's how we feel. But it's obviously not true. So everybody is completely brainwashed, in inverted commas, by their own kind of set of stories. But also, cynical in a way, because you see the power of stories to persuade people into doing, believing things that aren't good, and to lead people into acts that are, pretty terrible. I think that's it, really. I mean, story is not good or bad. Story can make us do incredible things. It can make us invent, amazing technologies and go to the moon and all that stuff. But story can also lead us into sort of genocide and horrendous acts. So you're kind of in awe of storytelling in a good way, but also in a bad way. You see, it's the absolutely incredible power it has to get people to do things that are sometimes not great.
Is there one person, when you think about storytelling, you mentioned Apple earlier, but is there a person that you think is just, whatever, a savant storyteller, or someone who's just truly excellent at it?
Man, obviously, Steve Jobs was, in terms of marketing, Steve Jobs was just off the chart, because he had this instinct for, identity, appealing to identity in order to sell his products. It was amazing. On the negative side, obviously Hitler. He was a storyteller, and that's how he gained his power. He told a story that people believed about the decline of the status of the German nation, and that he was going to his story was all about status. It was all about how we're going to create this Third Reich, this 1,000-year German kingdom that was going to be the best the world had ever seen. And what I didn't understand before I did my research is because you just think, when you think about Hitler, you think of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. Of course you do. But during the 1930s and the pre-war years, he didn't really talk about the Jews because it wasn't playing well with the middle classes whose votes he wanted and whose support he wanted. So in the 20s, he was going on about the Jews a lot. But in the 30s, he stopped. So all of his propaganda, all of his storytelling was all about status. It was all about, Germany's been ruined by these, by the Allied powers, the Treaty of Versailles, and we're going to destroy our enemies, and we're going to raise the level of the German nation to a level never seen before in human history. And so it was that got people completely obsessed with him, the storytelling, but also because he started to do it. He really was an extraordinary leader in the sense that he did, turn their economy around, and he, there was all these amazing technical advances like the world's first motorway system, and they were the first government, for example, to connect smoking with cancer and legislate against it. So they had all these, the nation became richer under Hitler, and then he started fighting his enemies and winning. For a while we just rolled over when he, got his land back and began rearming. So he was, unfortunately, probably the greatest leader of the 20th century, just by the sheer enormous influence and power he had over his people, by the story he told, but also the story he kind of enacted. And of course, it's to all our cost, to enormous, incalculable cost, that he was so persuasive.
If you could rewrite one moment of your own life story, not erase it, just rewrite it, what would it be?
Man, that's a good question. Wow. Could rewrite one story from my life? That's a really good question. That goes deep. I think when I was a young man, I was very dysfunctional. I had an alcohol problem, and I was very confused and found it very difficult to get on with people. And so I have a lot of regrets about that part of my life, about the late teens and early to mid 20s, because so I would rewrite that period, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I think I was probably a bit of an arsehole. I was very angry. I was very confused. I was drinking a lot of drink, and so that would be the what I would rewrite. And specifically, I think the anger came from, I just felt like the world was this unfair place that was kind of ranged against me, and I guess there's some kind of paranoia and resentment that came with that. But it took me a while to figure out that that's just not true. That actually the world is, the world can be obviously deeply unfair. But if you're a young man or a young woman and you work hard and you get on with people, chances are good things are going to happen to you. It's not a fixed game. Your life will improve. And indeed, that's what happened when I gave up drinking, and met my wife, who was a very stabilizing influence on me. My life got better. So I learned through trial and error that actually the world wasn't this dark, nasty game that was all against me. So that's the bit, that's the part I would rewrite. You know, I don't think I was very good company, to put it politely. You know, between the ages of say 14 and 25.
The last question I try to ask every guest is for them to brag about their family. I think it is our true magnum opus.
My family. Well, I don't have children. I have 2 dogs and I have a lovely wife. So I'll brag about my wife, I suppose. Yeah, she's an incredible person. She works for a company called. Well, when I met Farah, she was a writer for a magazine like I was, but she quickly overtook me and became an editor. So she was editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, then editor of Elle magazine, and now she works for Substack, the American essay company. So she works for this Silicon Valley company, but from a bedroom upstairs. So she's really an extraordinary woman, and she's always impressing me and always pushing me on as well and encouraging me. She's very ambitious, and she's a high achiever. So that's my bragging about my my family.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
I mean, I don't know if it's the happiest moment, but like, I do remember the day I left home. You know, I was talking before about I wasn't very happy at home, and I do remember the day I left home and moved into somebody's house. I was living in his loft, and I just felt this amazing sense of lightness and freedom. It really was a powerful feeling that my life was now beginning, and indeed that turned out to be the case. So I don't know if that's literally the happiest moment of my life. But that's definitely the moment that springs to mind, was that feeling of almost like being born, like properly, finally getting out of that house and into the real world where I could actually sort of begin to live my own life.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Partly it's, I was talking that period of my life between teens and mid-20s, like part of the ramifications of that was that I failed all my exams at school. And so whilst all my friends were going to university, I was working in a record shop at the age of 18. And I really felt like my life had failed. And then I've got fired from that shop as well. I got fired from that shop. So I really was at the, I really thought my life was kind of over. But kind of connected into that was who I was. Like I wasn't a functional person. I wasn't good to be around. I had some stupid ideas about the world. So connected into that was that kind of internal adversity of actually fixing my brain and realizing you're not succeeding in life. There's something wrong with your fucking head, man. Like, get it sorted out. And that took years. I mean, and really, I suppose it was giving up drinking that was the big change. It wasn't until I gave up drinking. It was when I gave up drinking, Farah, who became my wife, she wouldn't have gone anywhere near me when I was still drinking. So that was the kind of domino effect of fixing my head, fixing my life, starting to actually be functional. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest adversity, that whole period of craziness.
What are you most excited about?
What am I most excited about in the future? Well, I mean, my next book I'm really excited about, which at the moment is going to be called You Are a Story. I've just launched a Substack of the same name newsletter, which is so I'm kind of trying to write much more personal, kind of memoir-based stuff, and also trying to use some of the things I've been learning over the last 15, 20 years about the science of storytelling to help myself and other people live happier lives, so suffer less sort of stress and misery and self-hatred and all those kinds of things. So that's what's motivating me at the moment.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Fucking hell. What advice would you give your younger self? Where do you begin? Just, as I said before, I think just to have a bit of faith in the world. I had no faith in the world. Like I had no faith in the world that like nobody ever told me that in order to live a good life, you've just got to show up and put the hours in. Like I had no faith that if you offered value to the world, you'd be rewarded. And for most people, especially in the West, that is completely true. Like I had a very dark, cynical view of humanity and the world. You know, I was very, very left wing in that way. I thought it was all corruption and rich people were all evil, and anybody that showed up and worked hard at work was kind of pathetic and selling out to the man. You know, all really, beliefs that are very juvenile. And also just very, very unhelpful to the individual. Like if you believe that stuff, like a lot of people on the left did back then, I'm sure a lot still do. Like it's hard to get on in the world. And what I've learned, especially writing the status game, was that life is about success is about adding value. If you add value to the world in some form, you're going to get rewards back. It's as simple as that. And the more value you add, the greater the rewards. That's, of course, it's not a cast iron rule, but that's generally how it works. And that's why rich people are rich. It's not because they're corrupt. It's because they started Amazon. How much value has Jeff Bezos added to the world? Masses of value. He's created endless jobs and paid billions in taxes. Like that is adding value. So that's the main thing. That's the thing. I think I had a very toxic view of how capitalism works and how the Western world works, and partly through my research, especially for the book The Status Game. When I actually looked at what is Western values, what is Western individualism, how does capitalism work, you suddenly realize it's not this sick game. It's actually been responsible for so much that's good, not just in the West, but in the whole world. Massive rises in living standards, comfort for billions, you name it. So yeah, that's the advice I would give myself, is just to give up this toxic, negative, cynical view of the world.
That's a good one. The next one is, this is a good chance to plug your book again. Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
Book recommendations for you or the listeners? That's a good one. I won't recommend my own books because that would be ridiculous. What books would I recommend? God, where do you start? I've just read a novel that I really enjoyed called Perfection, which is about the millennials, and it's about these two kind of tech working millennials that moved to Berlin, and it's a really interesting book about the kind of emptiness of that kind of digital nomad life, where they're all kind of chasing the images that they see on Instagram and on Facebook and trying to build a life that resembles what they see on the internet. And it's a really interesting kind of examination of the kind of hollowness of that. So I thought that was a very sort of powerful book. I can't remember the name of the author though. It's an Italian guy. But it's called Perfection. It's just published recently. So I do sort of strongly recommend that book.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
No, apart from thank you so much for talking to me, Tim and Troy. It's been a real pleasure to meet you both, and thank you so much for engaging so well with my ideas and my writing. It's amazing to have the privilege and the opportunity to talk about this stuff with you.
Will, thank you again for talking with us today. It was really interesting to hear your thoughts and different perspectives on storytelling. You are truly an expert. God bless you and your family. And anyone who likes Will's masterful storytelling should go get his new book, A Story is a Deal.
Hey, Will, thank you so much. And I got to go think about what stories I'm subscribed to that I shouldn't be now that we talked.
Thank you both. Cheers, Tim. Cheers, Troy. I really appreciate it. God bless you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting the podcast for free by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. This episode of Nothing Left Unsaid is brought to you by 11 Labs. Their groundbreaking technology makes a huge difference, and we're grateful for their support. To learn more, visit 11labs.io. A substantial portion of our sponsorship proceeds go to tackleals.com, funding cutting-edge ALS research. If you'd like to join the fight and contribute, visit tackleals.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Nothing Left Unsaid.